Hi everyone, I'm Stephen and welcome to Watch Out. The whole point of my channel has always been to show you my watchmaking journey from the very beginning as a complete noob. And someone asked me about what tools I've bought for watchmaking as a beginner. I know there's plenty of other videos out there that talk about watchmakers' tools and what you can buy and so on. But the point of this video is to show you the tools that I bought as a complete beginner and what they're used for, what I use them for, and even the ones I've bought that I wish that I hadn't bought, which there's not too many of, thankfully. So let's dive right into it. The things that I have found that I have needed as a watchmaker getting started from the absolute beginning. And the very first thing is a workspace. I'm actually in a garage. It needs to be somewhere nice and quiet and secluded. It's not quite outside. There's nothing I can do about that. You've probably heard lots of planes going over in my videos. As far as in the house, somewhere that is as quiet and away from the general activity of the house as possible. So I have this workbench. This actually doubles as my electronics workbench for my other channel, Audio Nautica. So obviously I've got to have this cleared to be doing watchmaking and make sure there's not bits of solder or wire floating around, because we certainly don't want those to get inside of a watch. So ideally a dedicated workspace is best. I've got the blue anti-static mat on the bench, which is actually a pretty good workspace, but what most people do for watchmaking is they use these green mats. So I bought this green mat. The Bergeon mat is very, very expensive. The only thing about this mat is it had an adhesive surface, so you can stick it down to a table, but I don't want it stuck down. I stuck it onto this piece of cork that I had floating around. But the only thing that I've found that's kind of thrown me a little bit is because I'm using the microscope, which I'll talk about later, it means that everything is that, centimetre and a half up off the bench. And also when you put things in a movement holder, it's even further up. So I actually run into a problem with focal length on the microscope. So I've had to jack the microscope up as well to get it higher so that I can actually focus on the movement when it's sitting on that work mat in the movement holder. So that's just something to be mindful of, is that if where you're working ends up too high, you'll run into a problem with focusing on the microscope. So that's the workbench, the workspace itself, obviously a comfortable chair as well. The next thing is that you need to be able to see what you are doing. So you need good light. There is no way you will possibly do this with the light in a room, so you will definitely need a dedicated light. Because I generally work under the microscope most of the time, the light from the microscope is what I use. But you could also use something like this Maggie lamp, and I generally do use this for additional lighting. And I've also got that LED ring light behind, which helps also. That's just like one of those, cheap Amazon, YouTube kind of lights. And yeah, so those are important for having good light. Then you need to be able to actually see what it is that you are working on. And there's a couple of approaches that you can go about with that. As I mentioned, I have got this Maggie lamp. Really, a Maggie lamp in itself is not going to be sufficient for working on a watch. It just isn't going to be good enough. So I would really say don't try it. So in terms of actual magnification that you need to be able to work on a watch, there's a couple of ways that you can go. So as I mentioned in this video, I'm going to show you what I actually bought and what's worked for me and what hasn't worked. So the first things that I actually bought was these loops here. They were not expensive. They came in as this pack of 5. And then separately I bought this little loop holder. Honestly, I wish I had not bought those. They just don't work for me. The main reason they don't work for me is because I wear glasses. So what does work for me wearing glasses is this. I think this is 5 times from memory, and it's got this little clip. So it just clips onto the arm of my glasses just like this. And that works really well for me. With all of these, so with the loops and also with with this little guy here, the focal length, the focal distance is really short. So you'll need to have, you know, the watch will need to be about that close or so to be able to work on the watch. So because my idea was to basically do YouTube from the very beginning, you run into the problem that it's very easy for your head to get in the way of filming if you're using those things. I know it can be done, but I went down the microscope path and I made a separate video about this microscope that I got from AliExpress. But people describe the microscope as a game changer, and I think that it absolutely is. I do almost all of my work under the microscope. I can see an awful lot with the microscope that I wouldn't be able to see with those loupes. I guess the downside of the microscope is that you're kind of more fixed in the kind of plane that you're working in. It's more difficult to sort of move things around, but then in some senses that can be good as well. So I got a trinocular microscope because from the very beginning my intention always was to do YouTube with this, and also I can use it for my electronics work as well. But if all you're wanting to do is, you know, if you don't need the camera, then you just buy a standard binocular camera. I think you could probably get a decent camera for, I don't know, I haven't looked, but maybe about $350, $400 US. This one was from AliExpress. Here in Australia, the freight from Amscope was going to be prohibitive. It would have been probably about 1,500 Australian by the time I factored the freight in. So it was cheaper to go with the Eakins option, but I think if from the US, it's probably much of a muchness in terms of price. But I am very happy with this Eakins microscope. Apparently it's the same factory that makes the Amscope microscopes, and they look basically the same. So, you know, strictly speaking, do you need a microscope to do watchmaking? Well, real watchmakers don't have them, or my watchmaker doesn't anyway. But I think when you're getting started out, you have no intuition. If you're just doing this as a hobbyist, you know, I haven't got anyone to tell you what you're doing wrong. You just got to wing it. So I think being able to see things really makes all of the difference. If you just want to pull a movement apart and put it back together, and that's all you ever wanted to do, I know buying a microscope is hard to justify. You could probably get away with just the loupes in doing that, but then you're going to need an awful lot of tools anyway. I just can't see how you're going to be pulling a watch apart and putting it back together without making a decent investment, as we'll see by the rest of this video. So obviously you're going to need to be able to get the watch apart, and there's various tools that may be required for that depending on the kind of case that the watch has. So if it has a snap back, then you'll need one of these, which is a case opening knife. And I have the Bergeon one. I wouldn't recommend anything less than the Bergeon one. If you have a screw-on back, then you are going to want at the very least one of these. This is just a cheap Amazon one. You're probably going to want one of these as well. This is the Bergeon case opening ball, but you must have one of these because there will be cases that are on so tight that you can't get it off with this. The risk with this is if it slips, then you'll put a scratch on the back of the watch, which you don't want. There are sort of like fancier ones like this, and again this was just cheap on Amazon. It comes with a range of bits, but I don't think I've actually used this one. I generally use this one. I just find this one is easier to set up, and then this is to actually hold the watch while you're actually doing this, because if you're just holding it by hand, and you've got much more of a risk of slipping, and again if you slip you're going to put a great big scratch in the back of the watch. There are certain watches that you need specialized tools to get apart, so like Rolexes for example, they have like a splining on the case back and you need a special tool to be able to get those open. But if you're a beginner like me, you probably shouldn't be playing around with Rolexes. Once you start pulling the watch apart, you're going to need somewhere to put all the parts so that you don't lose them. Some people, they do lay them out on the bench. Looks impressive, but I don't like that idea because you bang the bench with your leg and they're gone, and then what are you going to do? So I'm very careful about putting them into containers. So you can get these specialized watchmaking parts containers. They're good for keeping the parts sorted according to function. This is a little box that's got a little plastic skin in it for putting the hands in so that the hands are kept protected. And then this box here just came from my local hardware store. It's got little divisions. I've used that for putting bigger parts in, like the case, for example. When I take the case apart, and if I've got the mainspring out, I might put the mainspring in there, and various big things that won't fit anywhere else. Also, once you've got the movement out of the case, you want to keep dust out of it. And so if you're not actually working on it, then what you can use is, like, this is just like a little plastic jar. This was a peanut butter jar, and you can just put that over the top of the watch like so, and that will stop any dust or debris or whatever from falling into the movement while you're not actually working on it. So now we start to get into some actual tools that you'll need for getting the watch apart. This is a spring bar tool. It's for actually removing the strap from the watch case itself, which you'll often need to do. These are hand levers. These are just cheap Amazon ones. They seem to work quite well. And then this is a hand press tool for putting the hands back onto the watch when you're reassembling it. So those are all necessary. Also, plastic bag to protect the dial when you're using the hand levers. This is called a casing cushion. It's usually used for when you're sort of reassembling the watch right at the end, but it's just whenever you need a soft surface for working on things, you can use that for this. There's all sorts of cheap knockoffs of those around. Now, your standard go-to tools for working on all the time: movement holder. You can't just work on a movement with it floating around on the bench, so it needs to be held in something. So that's what this is, the standard Bergeon 4040. Don't get anything else, just get one of those. Hand air blower, which is really good for keeping things clean, blowing dust away, and so on, and even for testing the movement, because you can actually blow on bits of the movement to make sure they're free rather than physically forcing them. Plastic sticks. I have got 2 plastic sticks, really good for holding things down while you're working on the movement. Use those all the time. Also, Pegwood. Strictly speaking, it's a consumable, but it's good for cleaning things, holding things down, general use, and you'll need a scalpel to sharpen the pegwood. You will need tweezers. These are proper watchmaking tweezers. Get the magnetic free ones if you can. 3 sizes: 00 are the stiffest ones, number 2 are the medium ones, and the number 4 are the fine ones. You will need the 3 sizes. And I've also got these AA brass tweezers, or you can get bronze tweezers as fine as well. That's just because they're not going to scratch things, so but they're not as durable as the steel tweezers. Then, of course, screwdrivers. So this is the Bergeon set of screwdrivers. It's not especially expensive compared to some of the things you'll buy from Bergeon, but yeah, you really do need the proper watchmakers quality screwdrivers. People say that you should buy the best ones that you can afford, and yes, that is absolutely true. These ones come with 1 spare bit for each size. What I found as a beginner is that it is very easy as a beginner, because you haven't learnt the skills for how to handle the screwdrivers yet, and I'm still learning. It's very easy to damage the screwdrivers, and once they've been damaged, it's very easy to damage them even more. So really the only long-term solution for that, unless you're planning to just throw money at things, is a screwdriver sharpener. And so I have the Bergeon one. I did manage to damage some of my screwdrivers on my very first movement teardown, and so that's the screwdriver sharpener. And then you'll also need this. There is a Bergeon version of this which is pretty expensive. This is the cheap Indian one, so the cheap Indian one is fine. And basically you just put the screwdriver in this hole here and hold it at the right angle and go along there with some 3-in-1 oil on here. So strictly speaking, you probably don't need that if you're just going to do one movement, but then I can't see why you would be buying all these tools to just do one movement. This is a combination stone, which is good for cleaning things, sharpening things, but I haven't really used that, to be honest, so I'm not sure I should have bought that. This is a pin vise. It's needed for doing things like when you need to hold something that is like a pin in shape. So for example, if you had to resecure the crown to the stem, then you'd want to be using one of these. And these are not expensive, and yes, I have actually used this. I needed to resecure the crown on the last watch that I did. Oilers, these are the Bergeon oilers. They're not expensive, and yes, to properly service a watch you definitely need oilers. Although I've generally only used the one size, the smallest size, the red one, AR. I haven't used the other sizes at all. I just found them too big for everything. Staking block, when you need to work on something where it's got something protruding through, like the mainspring, for example, or the mainspring barrel. When you've got the arbor poking through, you can set the arbor through there. And a Canon pinion removal tool. This is the Bergeon one. Again, I would not recommend anything other than this. And yes, you really do need this tool to be able to get the watch apart. You're just asking for trouble if you try to take the Canon pinion off with tweezers. So Canon pinion removal tool. This is a little fiberglass brush, and it's actually magic, this thing. It's really great for taking off surface rust, especially. Surface rust off your main plate or anywhere, so definitely invaluable, not expensive. But yeah, you really do need one of those. This little tool here is just for snapping the lid back onto the mainspring barrel. These are oil pots for keeping the different kinds of oil in. So there generally are a minimum of 4 oils that you need to service a watch. Probably 5 actually. We'll talk about that soon. And then this is a set of, I bought these used on eBay, mainspring winders. If you're going to disassemble the mainspring, then you absolutely must have these. It is very poor practice to reassemble the mainspring by hand. I have done it because some of these ones here, the hook is actually broken off, so I couldn't actually use the correct size that I needed to use. But there are cheap Chinese options that you can get. Some people swear by them. I don't have a set, so I don't know. This is all I have at the moment. Someone also suggested a 3D printed set, which I should look at. But yeah, the Bergeon set of winders is, I think it's about $1,000 US or something like that. So it's a lot of money to justify, even for someone like me. You know, I'm doing maybe one movement every few months at the moment. So I just can't justify spending that sort of money on mainspring winders. But you really do need to have it if you're going to be doing watches. You can buy the mainsprings, you can buy a new mainspring and put that in, and if you do that, then you don't need the winder. But something could happen like what happened to me on a previous movement, where I bought a new mainspring, and in the process of trying to get the arbor back in, the mainspring actually popped out, so I ended up having to wind it in anyway. A demagnetizer, once the watch has been serviced and reassembled, it should be demagnetized. An ultrasonic cleaner. You can clean the parts by hand, but it is extremely time consuming. It is still extremely time consuming to do it with an ultrasonic cleaner, but just less time consuming. A lot of effort is required to make sure that the parts are properly clean. I do not have a watch cleaning machine. I really can't justify one for the amount of work that I'm doing at this point. Also, for ultrasonic cleaning, you're going to need these little brass baskets to put the parts in. You could use those in a watchmaking machine as well, or watch cleaning machine. And then in the ultrasonic cleaner, I put these inside of these little jars. These are actually little jam jars like you get in restaurants. And I have IPA, or isopropyl alcohol in there. It just means I'm not filling the whole tub the ultrasonic cleaner up with IPA. I just put water in the tub, and then I put these inside the tub and the jars inside of here in the ultrasonic cleaner. In terms of parts, I bought this box full of O-rings, because the chances are that if you've got a water resistant watch, the O-ring in it is going to be perished and going to need to be replaced. So that's what these are all for. It's also likely that the O-ring on the stem for the crown is likely to be replaced as well. I don't have a kit for that. The last watch I did, I just worked out the size roughly and bought these ones here. I couldn't find a kit that seems to me suitable for those O-rings. I guess they're out there. Also these various size stainless steel spring bars, because again on the strap, if you've got a busted spring bar, they're all different sizes and you need to be able to just bang straight away replace it. This greasing pad, which is for applying a controlled amount of silicone grease to an O-ring. You sit the O-ring in there and you just turn the lid and it will put a fine amount of grease onto it. And also the ubiquitous Weishi No. 1000 Timegrapher. Strictly speaking, you can get away without a Timegrapher, but I think if you want a watch to run properly, you really do need one. Because a watch can keep time, but it can still be very ill. And so the Timegrapher will tell you things that you just can't really tell just by looking at the watch. Also, you can have a problem that is not actually a regulation problem. So for example, if you have low amplitude, then the watch will tend to run faster. You can try to adjust the rate all you like. It won't make any difference because the watch is not actually running correctly. You won't be able to regulate out the problem. So those things will become clear immediately when you put the watch on the Timegrapher. Also things like beat error, again, you can't adjust out the beat error just by looking at it. I mean, you can get it reasonably right by eye, but you can't fine tune it by eye. Again, you can tell by eye whether it's got low amplitude or high amplitude, but you can't tell what it actually is by eye. So all of those things, you're going to need the Timegrapher to be able to do that. So I recommend the Weishi No. 1000. There are various apps and so on that you can get that run on your phone. I haven't tried them, but honestly, I don't think they're as good. I think the Weishi, for what it is very reasonably priced, and I don't think you need to go for anything more expensive than this unit. So we now come to the consumables. These are the different kinds of lubricants. There are 6 kinds of lubricants here. Have I used all of these? Well, there's only one that I haven't used yet. So yes, I do need them all. So the 9010, that's your lightest oil for fast rotating things. 9104, this is the synthetic version of D5, so that's the medium oil. The 9501, this is the blue grease, which is for sliding things. The 9415, this is for the jewels on the pallet fork for lubricating the escape wheel. 8200, this is mainspring grease. So if you clean an old mainspring, you need to re-lube it with this. And then this is the only one I haven't used here, 8213. This is braking grease, which is used to lubricate the inside of the drum wall in an automatic movement because it needs to be able to keep sliding. Then in terms of other consumables, finger cots. Rodico, absolutely must have. If you've been watching any videos at all, you'll know why. Bergeon 1-dip or B-dip, it's for cleaning the jewels, for cleaning the pallet fork and cleaning the balance complete, because IPA will dissolve the adhesives and things will fall apart. But for other things, it's perfectly okay to use IPA, so I've got a lot of that. Also, some good old Q-tips cotton buds. Some evapor rust, so if you have a part that actually has rusted, you need to dunk it into this to deal with the rust, and also Polywatch, which is for dealing with scratched acrylic, scratched crystals on the front of the watch case. So I think that pretty much covers everything that I've purchased so far. I'd be really interested to see what you guys think that I should get next, you know, especially if you're someone who's a lot further down the journey than I am, who's, you know, maybe done dozens of movements by now or more. What do you think that I should buy next? I'm mindful that I don't have a case press and I don't have a crystal press, so I haven't actually done any snapback watches yet, so I'm not sure whether you strictly speaking need a case press for snapping the back of the case on. But I don't have a crystal press, so I don't have the ability at the moment to change out a crystal if I needed to. So I'd be interested to know your thoughts on that. A staking set perhaps, or is that really not something that's especially needed? Yeah, I'd just really like to know what your thoughts are on where might be best to go from here. But yeah, I just wanted to show what I, as a beginner, a complete noob, have bought so far. I think I've used all of these tools except for the very small handful of ones that I mentioned that I haven't used, but really I have used them all and I have needed them all in these couple of movements that I've rebuilt so far. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please subscribe to my channel. It means so much to me. You might like to check out my other channel, Audio Nautica, which is about hi-fi and nautical things. You can support both of my channels at Patreon. Thanks so much for watching, and watch out.